As a good video capture of everything. This program doesn't always work the best, but as I can, I'll try to upload it to YouTube if anybody needs that. So what we're going to do is go ahead and open up brackets. And oh yeah, so like I said, we're going to be using brackets in this class. So if it's not already on the computer, then you're going to go to brackets.io. And you're going to use the download link there. Does it require a password? So when you try to use your own password? Yeah, so it won't let you actually upload.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Sorry, this is a new lab for me. I'm used to what we use upstairs, which is is there anybody that does not have brackets up and installed yet? So, like we talked about last time, what we're going to do is you're going to go into File, and does anyone else have, as far as where it says New HTML5 Template? Okay. So go into just New. And it should just have a very blank file like this. What we're going to do is we're going to create the general HTML template, which is just very, very simple. It is the one that we kind of went over a couple of weeks ago. So it starts off with the HTML tag, which is the left angle bracket, HTML. So again, any tags that we have in HTML, it's going to have the tag name there, surrounded by the left and right angle brackets. So we have HTML, and then we go ahead and end that HTML tag on the next line. So most tags that are in HTML have both a beginning tag as well as an ending tag. The beginning tag is just simply the tag name surrounded by the left and right angle brackets. And the ending tag is the same thing, but it starts inside that tag with a /. So we have the HTML, and inside of that, we're going to put in a tag that just simply says head. So we're going to create the beginning and ending tag for the head. It's usually a good idea to have the doc type, but just for right now, it's fine if you do not. In addition to the head, we're also going to have a body tag. So we have the HTML tag, which surrounds pretty much everything. Inside the HTML, we have one head and one body. When it comes to an HTML document, this specific HTML file, we only need one HTML tag, we only need one head, and we only need one body. The everything that is going to be visual in the browser is going to go within the body. Typically within the head we have other parameters like meta tags or titles, things that are mostly related to SEO, search engine optimization, which allows your website to be more visible on Google. We're not really going to be getting into SEO this semester, but just be aware that this is also where that information for the head goes. It's also where we're going to be eventually linking CSS style sheets. Hopefully we'll be getting to CSS next week. But for the most part, everything else is going to go inside here where we have the body. Now, before we get too much further, let's go ahead and save this file. And I'm going to call this index.html. Now, I'm calling it index for a very specific purpose, which we're going to be getting into in just a moment. But the main thing that makes this an HTML file is that extension .html. That's how the browser is going to recognize it as an HTML page, and how the browser is going to actually read the code we have rather than just outputting it as a text file. So if we did not say this as an HTML, if it was just simply .txt, then we would see this in the browser exactly as it is. But because it's an HTML file, when we open this in the browser, it will actually read this code and any other tags we have in here. Are there any questions? Yes.
Is brackets free by any chance?
Oh yeah, it's a completely free program.
Actually, you have Dreamweaver. It's not a big deal. So I just figured.
Yeah, and the thing is, like I said, Dreamweaver is good, but for the purposes of what we're going to be doing in this class, because we are doing hand coding, which means that we're not doing any like sort of WYSIWYG things that Dreamweaver is mostly made for. And there are also just certain other reasons why you use Dreamweaver over brackets, which just simply do not kind of apply to this class. Like, we're going to be doing things like from scratch, which kind of teaches you a little bit more about HTML rather than teaching you how to use Dreamweaver. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more universal. But yeah, any other questions so far? This is mostly just reviews what we did a couple weeks ago. So, inside the body, this is where we can put in any sort of a text that we want. And when we go to actually open this file in our browser, it's going to display just what's inside the body. Again, we're not seeing any of the other syntax, what we call the syntax, which is just the code. We're just seeing the content which is actually in the body. So, last time we also discussed other kinds of tags, specifically the bold or the strong tag. Bold and strong are identical. They do the exact same thing. It's really just a matter of personal preference of which one you use. So the bold and the strong tag make the font weight bold, and we start off with just simply a B, or we start off with strong inside the angle brackets. And we have the end tag after the word or after the phrase that we want to be actually bold. Now we can surround this around, again, a single character, a single word, or as many sentences as we want. One thing to note in brackets, if you happen to see an asterisk here, that means that the file itself is not saved yet. So once I save, you're going to see this asterisk, which is in the top left. You're going to see that go away as soon as I hit save. Now, I'm going to go back to the browser, and I'm going to go ahead and refresh. And then we can see that sort and of are both bolded because we have those tags surrounding those words. The other tag that we discussed was the I or italics tag, as well as EM for emphasis. Again, these two tags are identical. They do the exact same thing, so it's mostly just a matter of personal preference of what you use. And when I go back into the browser and I go ahead and hit refresh, we can see that those words are italicized. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a second HTML file. But before we do that, let's go ahead and identify the one that we are currently on. So, for this one, I'm going to say page 1. I'm just going to have that text page 1. And I'm going to create a second HTML file. I'm going to go into File and New, and let's just go ahead and copy and paste. So we're going to copy this all the code from page 1, and we're going to go ahead and put it into the second HTML file. Oh, sorry, I forgot. You might have it set up something a little bit more like this, like where you actually have the pages set up in the side.
What is the tool? And then what is the tool HTML?
Oh, so we just have we created this first one, and this is my index HTML page, and I created a new HTML file by going to File and New. And then I copied and pasted all the code from page 1.
Because on my working files, I have two index close to the new file.
Is let me take a look. Because it may just be certain settings that I have in brackets that are a little different.
You see two index and close to the new.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So if what you have is where it has Untitled 2. I'm not sure why mine is not showing it that way. But here in the left-hand side, you probably have the file which is called Untitled 2 before you actually save the file as something else. So you'll notice that before we actually save the file, it doesn't have any sort of color coding like we have in our first index. Like in this one, we have the color coding, which is letting us know that these are tags, and this one's not. So as soon as we go to save this, I'm going to go ahead and save this as page2.html. Then it's going to give us that color coding, and it should also give you the files here on the left-hand side.
Page2.html.
Yep.
Should I save this to a flash drive?
It's up to you if you want to put it on the computer for now. And then just transfer it to a flash drive later. Just as long as you remember where these files actually are. Yeah. So I have index, and I also have page 2. And in the text where we have page 1, I'm just going to relabel this page 2. So we have our index HTML that has page 1, and we have our page2.html, which has page 2. Inside of our folder, you don't have these images, but we do have two image type HTML files here, one for index.html and one for page2.html. Is there anybody that does not have that so far? So this is just a folder on your computer. Again, you don't have these images, but you should just have the two HTML files.
Yeah, it's just on like that.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. So, what we're going to do is we're going to create a link between these pages. So to create that link, we're going to use the A tag, which is often called the anchor tag. So, in where we have page 1, we're going to have a link to page 2. Let's go ahead and a couple lines down, we're going to have a tag. And let's go ahead and start the A tag and end the A tag, just again so that we don't forget that. And just like with the bold or italics tag, what actually goes in between the beginning and ending A tag is what we're actually applying the link to. So this is going to be, it can just simply be one word like link, or it can be multiple words, like we can say link to page 2. But whatever we put inside of that anchor tag, between the beginning and ending A tag, that is going to be the thing that we actually click on to go to page 2. Now, unlike a lot of the tags that we've dealt with so far, where we simply have like the B or the I for bold or italics, when it comes to the anchor tag, in order for it to actually link to the file or the website that we want, we actually have to edit the beginning tag. So inside the beginning anchor tag, right after the letter A, but before the right angle bracket, you're going to put in a space, and then you're going to type href. So this is what's called an attribute. Many tags will have different kinds of attributes associated with them, depending on what the tag actually is. The anchor tag in this case has the attribute href, and this is something that's actually very unique to the anchor tag. The href is what is going to enable us to tell the browser where we want this link to actually go to in our file structure or within the internet. So we start off with just the word href, which is short for hypertext reference. If you need to know acronyms for really cool cocktail parties. Hypertext reference, if that helps you at all. But it's also just simply called the href attribute. So we have href, and then we're going to have equals. And after the equals, you're going to put a set of quotations. So this can actually be double quotations or single quotations. It doesn't really matter too much, just as long as you are consistent with which one you use. So this can be, again, using these double quotes, or the single quotes, or the apostrophes, depending on how you say it. But it doesn't really matter as long as you make sure you use two of the same thing. And lastly, inside of those quotations, we're going to have where the page actually is and what the page actually is called that we want to link to.
Is it not easier instead of putting all those codes just to highlight the word and go under insert and hyperlink the word?
So you're talking about as far as like in like Microsoft Word, like how you do like.
Here in brackets. because I did in my assignment, I highlight a word
Mhm.
but I was using Dreamweaver. And then
Oh, in Dreamweaver.
I highlight the word and then you go on the insert and then you do the hyperlink and you do the side and it's quicker, I think.
Yeah, so in Dreamweaver, it probably has that menu option in there in order to actually do it just through the menu in Dreamweaver. This is the code way of doing it, so this is something that's going to translate to anywhere that you would actually write code. Again, brackets, looks like we don't actually have that option because to insert, yeah, because brackets assumes that again we're going to be doing hand coding. So this is essentially what Dreamweaver should be doing for you anyway, but this is kind of the way to kind of do it manually by hand, so that again we're not just learning like the Dreamweaver way of doing it. This is the kind of universal way of doing it. Does that make sense? So inside the, assuming you have the index.html and the page2 HTML in the exact same folder, inside the quotations, you're just going to write the file name, page2.html. And we want to make sure that we include the file name as well as dot and the extension. So, just because we're going to be getting into other attributes, now you don't have to type this out. This is just an example. This is just a template. But in a lot of cases where we just simply have a tag name, we have an ending tag that would again just be the slash whatever that tag name is. In the beginning of the tag, in the beginning tag here, we will often have space, an attribute, equals, quote, and then a value. So this is a typical template for a lot of tags that are going to have specific attributes associated with them. We're going to be going over the image tag today, which is going to have its own unique set of attributes for that. So where a lot of tags can simply be used right out of the box, like we have the body, we have the head, we have the HTML, we have the bold tag, we have the emphasis tag, the strong tag, italics tag. A lot of those tags can just be used right out of the box. Some tags are going to require you to use their attributes in order for you to actually use them to their full potential. For example, the A tag, if we just simply surround a word with A, then it's not really going to do anything. We actually have to specify the attribute, which in this case is called href. We're going to specify the attribute href, and we're going to have it equal to a value. The value is typically inside of quotations. And that value might be different depending on what that actual attribute is. Like I said, we're going to be going over the image tag, which is going to have its own unique set of attributes there. But we have the tag name, we have the attribute, and again, the value is inside of quotations. Now, this right here is nothing real, so we're going to go ahead and erase that. But it just kind of gives you an idea of what this template is. So we have page 1, we have href page 2, and the link to page 2. We're going to go ahead and save this, and again, if it's not saved, it has that little asterisk here in the top left. So we're going to make sure this is saved. And we're going to go ahead and if you go back to the browser, assuming you still have it open, you can also just simply double click on the file again. We see that we have page 1 and we have where it says link to page 2. Naturally, the browser is going to highlight any links in this very lovely shade of blue. It's a very obnoxious shade of blue in my opinion. We have this lovely shade of blue and we have an underline. We can customize any links later on once we start to get into our CSS to say like exactly how we want links to look as far as the color, whether or not we want them underlined, or lots of other different properties. But for now, by default, it's going to highlight any links that we have in blue and underlined. So once we actually click on this, it's going to go to page 2. So it's automatically going to link to what we're calling page 2 in the HTML. You might notice that if you're taking a look at the very top of the browser, where we have the address, that address is changing depending on which file we're actually on. So before, if we just go back in the browser, you're going to have something very different at the very beginning of this. But at the very end, it's going to say index.html. And then when we go to page 2, it should say page2.html. And again, it should let us know that we're on page 2 because we defined it that way.
So are you just using any browser for
Yes.
this? And are we saving this to our house?
So you can save it to the desktop, or I mean, that's fine. But what you have is fine. And go ahead and double click on the index.html.
Oh, okay.
And it'll open it up with whatever the default browser is.
Oh,
there.
I didn't get that. The second part, got the first part. I didn't get the second part.
The second part.
To the link. I got that, but it doesn't connect to
Go back to your HTML.
page 2.
Oh, so we need to actually create the page 2 file. Go into. Do you know where you save this?
I saved it to the desktop.
Alright, so this is the index.html. Go back to page 2.
Yeah.
And it looks like it might not be saved correctly. Go into File, Save As. And
Oh, that's my question.
yeah, so go to save it onto the desktop. Make sure it has the extension .html. So
Here.
go to Save As here. And to where you have Save As, this is page 2. Put in .html.
That's fine.
And again, make sure it's on the desktop.
Okay.
So we're gonna try it now. Cool.
Does it matter if all the pages that are connected, should they all be in the same folder, or does it like just search or whatever?
That's a very good question. So right now, the reason why this works is because they are in the exact same folder. Sorry, let me plug in. Right now, the reason why this works is because they're all in the exact same folder. But if they were not, then we'd have to specify the href a little bit differently. Let me see here.
Or put in like the folder name.
Yes, exactly. 1 second.
Oh, they're in,
I got it. Take the computer or the laptop? Got the laptop. So, when it comes to actually linking to the HTML file, again, this is working right now because we have it in the exact same folder. Now, your own personal folder structure is mostly a matter of personal preference, like how you actually would like to put your other HTML files, other images, any sort of other files that you're actually linking in your website. Your folder structure is mostly up to you. However, I'd like to show you exactly how, if you do have it in separate folders, how to actually link in many different ways. This is going to be even more important when it comes to our images, because it can sometimes be pretty common to have all of your HTML files in the exact same folder. we definitely want to kind of separate out our images so that our folders are a little bit clean. If you just have like 1 or 2 images with your website, maybe it doesn't matter. But as soon as you get over a few different images, it's best to have that separate. So, there's actually a link on the class website which goes over the anatomy of a URL. So a URL, or also called an address, will typically look something like this. We'll have a combination of different parts like this. Now, we don't necessarily have to memorize every single part of this in order to understand it, but just so you get the general idea, we have a what's called a protocol, and the subdomain, the second level domain, and the TLD. All of this has to do with generally where it exists on the internet. So where we're dealing with files that exist somewhere on the internet, on an actual domain, this is all part of the very beginning. After what we have this part here that's called the domain name, we have the file path. Now the file path makes a lot more sense and is a lot more relevant to us once we're actually talking about using files from our computer. The file path can include a folder, so the folder where these files actually exist. If you take a look at the URL address in your browser when you are using these files, again, you're going to see some sort of path that relates to the desktop or wherever you actually save these files. At the very end of the file path, you're going to have the file name itself as well as the file type. This one's called PHP, but you would have HTML, or in the case of when we're dealing with images, we would have like .jpeg, .png, .gif. This would be the path to that file. Get a question? Yes. A PHP file is another kind of a code file. So in the same way that we create HTML files, that's going to house all of our code, not images. The PHP file is a very similar kind of a code file, but it's kind of like a next level thing. So it's using what's called server-side programming languages. PHP is a very specific language that is mostly used for communicating to a database. So if you ever have a website that needs to save information, so that when someone logs into it, they come back to it and it still has the same exact information, chances are you need a server-side scripting language which will communicate to a database where it's actually saving that information. So whenever you have a website that's a bit more complicated than like the kind of things that we're going to be creating this semester, where it actually needs to save information, where it needs to kind of pull information from various resources, then we typically have a server-side scripting language like PHP, but there's other examples as well. So yes. Any other questions? Okay. So, like I said, the part that's going to be most relevant to us is where we have this file path. So, go into the folder or the desktop where you have your files right now, and go ahead and create a brand new folder. And we can call that folder really whatever we want. Let's call it Pages. Now, while we're here, when it comes to naming files, and this goes for folders, it goes for HTML files, it goes for image files, it goes for CSS files. Whenever we're talking about any sort of naming for files for for our websites, we want to make sure that we follow a few rules. First, we want to make sure there are no spaces or special characters when it comes to the names of them. So So special characters are pretty much anything except for letters or numbers. But the exceptions would be things like a dash or an underscore, or let's just leave it at that. So you do not want any spaces in your folder or file names. You do not want any other kind of special characters in your file names. Obviously, we have the dot before the extension, like we have .jpeg or .html, but we don't want to have any sort of other special characters in our file names. Also,
What about the uppercase and lowercase? Can you name it with an uppercase the file?
yes, absolutely. You can
Yeah.
use uppercase and lowercase, but, and that brings me to the next point, HTML is case sensitive. So however you define your folders, however you define your files, you want to make sure that you remember how you're defining the case, because it will very often not find the files that you want if you're mixing up the case from what it actually is. So a lot of programmers will use what's called camel case, where if you have multiple words and you don't want to have spaces, for example, like it's called this is the folder. We use camel case, and sorry, that's a little hard to say. You'll see a lot of programmers use, again, this camel case method where each word starts with a capital letter except for the very first one. It's just an aesthetic. It's nothing that you're required to do. It's just if you want to look cool to other programmers, this is the way that we do it. But yeah, again, I can't space this enough. No spaces. Spaces will really kind of mess you up when it comes to file and folder names. Yes?
I got in the habit of always doing this, and I know that work, like, no one does that, and with all their files, they have, like, all the wrong things. Is it fine for everything except, like, HTML files and stuff? Like,
Are you saying that people don't use... I'm sorry, you're saying...
Sorry,
What do you mean?
everyone that I work with, they do the period and the spaces and, like, everything that's not usable. And I, like, am trying to convince them that don't do that. But they're not working in HTML, like, they just name their file like that. But that's still wrong,
yeah.
right?
Well, my field is web design, so I'm going to say that it's definitely wrong for web design. However, I would think that with, like, whenever you're dealing with programs like InDesign, where you're linking to other files, you want to be very, very careful about how you're actually defining those file names. So, while I can say for web design, it's absolutely required, I think that for, other fields, it's going to kind of just be like how that team, really likes to work. But I think, again, for any sort of programs, again, like InDesign, where there's a link to a specific file in your InDesign file, again, you want to be very careful about how you're naming those, because there could be separate rules like for that. But yeah. Any question?
If HTML is easier and you were to use the name of folder like this and including link, will it not work if you type that all constants?
Correct. Well, I'll say usually that's correct. Sometimes it actually depends on wherever you're hosting. So right now, we have a host with Media Temple. And Media Temple might have certain very, very strict rules about, like, folders and files, like whether or not it has to exactly be the case like before that. What I will say is, it's just very smart to make sure that you're always consistent, because not every host, and I would say very few hosts, are lenient about that kind of thing. So best practice is you want to make sure that you are keeping the exact same case with your folder to your actual files.
Will you direct someone who's trying to type in that web address on landing page?
Yes, it can. Like I said, there are some hosts that, depending on where you're hosting, that might be lenient about that kind of thing, but it's not very common. So I would say that generally the answer is yes. Yeah. Now, like I said, you could also use underscores if you really like. Dashes are not quite as common, but I think that it's also allowed in a lot of cases. But like I said, as much as you can, I would stick with just letters and numbers. So if we have a folder, in wherever you save the HTML files, we have a folder called Pages. And I'm going to go ahead and put page 2 inside of the folder called Pages. Now, as it is right now, if I go back to my index.html, where we have our link to page 2, if I go ahead and click on that, it's going to say that the file is not found. Depending on your browser, this message might look a little bit different, but whenever you get something like this, it means that there's something wrong with how you're actually linking to that file. And one of the ways you can check is actually looking at the address in the top of the browser. This is saying that there's a folder called 2018-0215, and it's trying to find this file specifically in there. We can tell by the slashes of where it's trying to find that exact file. So because it's inside this folder called Pages, let's go back to our index.html and look at this href. So inside the quotations, this is again what's called the value for the attribute inside the quotations. The value in this case is right now page2.html, which is telling the browser that the page2.html is in the exact same folder as the index.html. In order to tell the browser that it's actually inside of a folder called Pages, at the very beginning of the value, still inside the quotations, we want to put in pages/ that file name. So if we start off with the folder name Pages, and then we do a slash, it will before the actual file name, it will actually find it inside of that folder Pages. So now if I go back to the browser, if I go back to that index.html and I refresh it, again, we want to make sure that anytime we're testing something new, that not only are the files actually saved, but we also refreshed. If I go back to the index.html and I click on page 2, it now actually finds it. And we can tell in the URL of the address at the top that it's actually looking for page 2 inside of a folder called Pages. Any questions on this?
I just need to confirm, in as opposed Pages the folder, and then page 2 is the second part of that folder?
What we have after the slash in this case is the full file name. So the file name including the extension.
Okay.
So this structure right now that we have is just a folder name / file name. Now, say that inside of Pages we create another folder. Let's call this Other. And let's say that we put our page 2 HTML inside of that folder for Other. So now from wherever you saved your index.html or on the desktop, we have a folder called Pages. Inside of Pages is a folder called Other. And inside of Other, there we have the page 2. In order to format our href now, we have to put in Pages / Other / page 2. Brackets is trying to help us out here. It gives you a little bit of a hint. And you could, whenever brackets gives you a hint like this, you could also just click on it and it will tell you, but we don't need brackets help. We can do this on our own. So anyway, we have the first folder, pages, we have the second folder, other, and we finally end with the file name. We always end with the file name. And again, always, 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 we want to make sure that when we have the file name, we also include the extension, which is HTML in this case. So this is the general structure. If we only have the file name, then that assumes that this file is in the same folder as the file that we're actually editing. So I always want to think from the perspective of the folder, or I'm sorry, of the file that we're actually editing. This is the index.html. So from here, this assumes that it's in the same folder. If we just have one folder name in there, like pages / the file name, this assumes that it is only one folder down. Where we have two folder names here, this assumes that it's two folders down. So right now, this is the only one that's actually correct, but we have a few different options here for how we actually link to any of our HTML files, depending on how we actually have it structured in our folder. Any questions? Okay. So, say that we want to link from page 2 back to page 1. The first thing I'm going to do is let's put page 2, I'm going to cut and paste it so that it's actually in pages, just to kind of simplify this for a minute. So from index.html, we have a folder called pages, and inside of pages we have page2.html. Inside of the index.html, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these other ones that are incorrect. And I'm going to go ahead and open up page2.html in brackets. So right now the only thing that's inside of page 2 is just simply the words page 2 as opposed to page 1. So I'm going to go ahead and create a anchor tag. So we have just the word a. And we have the angle brackets around that. We have the beginning tag and the ending tag. Inside of the two tags, between the beginning and ending tag, we're going to have the link to page 1. We're just going to have that text, and that's going to be the thing that we're actually clicking on. Then inside the beginning A tag, I'm going to do space between the letter A and as well as the right angle bracket. And I'm going to put in href equals and then a set of quotes. So when we want to link from index into page 2, we go inside the folder, so we go into pages and then we find that file name. So we put in pages / whatever it was for page 2. In order to go up or back one folder, so right now we're inside of page2.html. This is the file that we're actually editing. In order to go back one folder or up one folder to get to index.html, we have to put in .. / or period / This period / tells the browser to go up or back one folder. So from page 2, we go up one folder, and then we can find the index.html. So after the .. / we're going to put in index.html. So if I go ahead and open up page 2, right now we have page 2 and link to page 1. When I go ahead and click on that, it's pulling up page 1. So, let's say, I'm going to close out of page 2 right now, in brackets, and inside the folder, I'm going to move, yes?
Sorry, if it was in like 2 folders.
Yep. So that's exactly where I was going to go next. No, it's perfectly fine. So if we have page 2 inside of other, so we have pages, and inside of pages we have other, and then we have the page2.html. In order to go back 2 folders, we would have .. and then we're going to say .. again. So each of these .. again tells the browser to go up or back 1 folder before we actually find the HTML. So in index we have pages /other /page2.html. In page 2 we have .. index.html. And in our folder we have our index.html, we have the folder pages, we have the folder other, and then we have the page 2. So again, from page 2 we have to go back 1 to get to pages, we have .. and then back 1 more, where we have the .. to finally find our index.html. Any questions? Yes.
Well, mine's not working.
So are you doing the 404 or the page not down?
Well, I have like here on page 2,
And you have yours inside of. So this is page 1. Oh, this is page 2. Page 2, you're saying. Yeah, this is page 2. You're going back 1 and you're finding page 1.html. I believe so. Go to other folder, and then you go and open up page 2.html. And then click on page 1. Yeah.
So I was doing, I clicked on page 1, so I had to click on, which I thought I could click on page 1, I was
So right now, you're on page 1. Go back to page 1. So right now, you just want to make sure that that folder structure matches what you currently have. So go back to page 1. So you only have one folder. You just have one folder.
Oh, I don't have.
Yeah, we took out the second folder.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so like I said, I'm going to show you as far as the if you have HTML files in multiple folders, and if it's a couple of folders deep, or if you are trying to link outside of a folder, how to actually do that. Now again, practically, a lot of times programmers will just simply have all of their HTML files in the same folder. Unless you have like a really, really huge website and you want to kind of organize things in that way. It is going to be definitely more important when we start to get into CSS and as far as our images to know how to link inside of a separate folder, because that's definitely where it's a much better idea to actually have separate folders for that purpose. But yes, so some of the time that we have left here, let's talk about images. So right now I have these two images. I have photo1.jpg and photo2.jpg. Let's actually put this, I want to put this on the class website so that if you want to go ahead and download these images to work with, you're free to work with whatever images you have available to you. I'm going to go ahead and put this on the class website really quick so that if you want to download them, you can. Okay, so if you refresh as far as where we have the week 2, we have those 2 images there. If you go ahead and right click on any one of them, you can go ahead and say save image as to save these 2 images that we're going to be working with today. But like I said, you can work with whatever images you want if you want to kind of follow along with something else. But we're also going to go ahead and open up Photoshop. So go ahead and open up these 2 files in Photoshop.
You said that you drop it on the side?
Yes, on the class website, if you go to week 2, and if you refresh, then those 2 images should be there, and you should just be able to right click and save it.
Yes.
Okay. So, I'm not here to kind of reteach you Photoshop from scratch, but I do want to show you one tool in Photoshop which is extremely helpful when it comes to formatting things for web. Now, there are several rules when it comes to making sure that images are going to look correct and actually be compatible with websites. First, we only have a few different options for files. You can either use a JPEG, a PNG, or a GIF. So those are the 3 that we can use as far as the file types. We can't really use TIFF in a way to actually display the images inside of on the screen itself.
The TIFF is more for screen.
Yeah. You can of course link to a TIFF if you're trying to get someone to download a TIFF, but when it comes to actually displaying it on your page, you can't really use a TIFF. So we have JPEG, PNG, or GIF. So rule 1 when it comes to making sure that images are going to be compatible for the web is 1, the file itself, JPEG, GIF, or PNG. Rule 2 is we want to make sure that the images are RGB. So we want to make sure they are in RGB format rather than CMYK. CMYK is more used for print. RGB is used for things that are on screen. So yeah, we want to make sure that the images are RGB. Third, we want to make sure the images are 72 dpi. They could be larger than that. However, it's just making the file itself bigger without actually increasing the quality. If you use 300 dpi images on the web, it's not going to increase the quality rather than 72 dpi. It's just going to be bigger. I'm sorry, bigger in file size, and not necessarily bigger actually in dimensions. So, yes. So the main rules is we want to make sure that the file extension, JPEG, GIF, or PNG. 2, we want to make sure that it's RGB instead of CMYK. And 3, we want to make sure it's 72 dpi. Now, rule 4 is more just a good convention. We also want to make sure that files are as small file size as possible. Dimensions, it's up to you. But as much as we can, we want to make sure the images are small in file size. Because when it comes to actually publishing our websites on the internet, your website is going to take a very long time for people to download if all of your images are huge in file size. Now, when it comes to dimensions, again, you can have a 1400 pixel wide image, and that can be several different file sizes depending on how you actually save it, how you actually save the quality of it. So, you as the designers can kind of make that decision as far as like where to sacrifice the quality versus the file size. Internet connections are a lot faster than they used to be. So you can err on the side of quality, but of course there are limitations. So you want to try to kind of make sure that images are good file size. I would say a pretty good rule of thumb is that even at your largest dimension size, try not to get over 2 megs, I would say. But that's just a very, very general rule of thumb. But yeah. Now, with those 4 rules in place, there's a tool in Photoshop that takes care of all 4 of those for you already. You can go through and you can kind of say like, okay, let me make sure when I do the save as that I'm only saving these formats. Let me make sure that in Photoshop, when I go into the color mode, I make sure that it's RGB. Let me make sure that under image dimensions, I make sure that it's 72 dpi. Or you can use this one tool that's going to take care of all of those things for you automatically. So the tool that I'm referring to is called Save for Web. If you go under File, and Export, there's a option for Save for Web. I believe it also says Legacy. I would memorize that keyboard shortcut if you can.
Question before this, okay, sorry. On the image size, do you want to be in an inches or pixels?
It's a good question. Pixels definitely makes much more sense whenever we're dealing with anything for web when it comes to dimensions rather than inches. Oh yeah, if I didn't already specify that on the class website, when I said the 200 width, again, make sure that's in pixels, not anything else. So, yes, so generally we measure everything when we start to get into CSS. We're going to be measuring everything when it comes to position as well as size in pixels. But yes. Has anyone not gotten to the Save for Web dialogue yet?
Once you get to that, then
Oh, and,
there it is.
and under export?
Oh, I haven't gotten to it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yes. Oh, that is Command Alt Shift. I think. Try that. Command Alt Shift S. It's whatever that. I think it's the Alt that's the weird one, right? Yeah.
Alt option.
Yeah, Alt option. So, is there anyone who's not there yet as far as the Save for Web? Cool. So Save for Web. We have a bunch of different options here, and so if you're not seeing what I'm seeing, first let's go into you should have some tabs here in the top left. If you can't see the screen, the first one says Original, the second one says Optimize, the third one says 2 Up, and the fourth one says 4 Up. Go into 2 Up. Okay. So with the 2 Up, we have 2 different versions of whatever image we're trying to save. This is going to show the original version, and one is going to show what the optimized version is, or what it is that we're actually trying to save. You might have yours side by side rather than stacked like that. It doesn't really matter. Whichever one, again, it'll have the label in the in the bottom left corner of that panel that'll say whether or not it's the original. And in this case, this is the optimized one. In this case, it's saying PNG 24. That's telling me that's the optimized one. So the reason why I like the 2 Up is so that as I start to make adjustments to this, I can see what the original looks like, so I can see how much I'm degrading the quality of this, and how much is actually worth it. So, doesn't really matter which one you opened, but go ahead and zoom in on whichever one you have a little bit. And this light switch here. Just this one. But so first thing we want to decide when it comes to this Save for Web panel is the kind of image we're going to be saving. If you go into the right-hand column, it's going to say preset, but right under, and you can choose one of those, but go to the drop-down menu, which is right underneath that, and you might have something that starts differently than PNG24. But it's gonna have GIF or GIF, JPEG, PNG8, PNG24, and something called WBMP. So the first thing you want to decide is what kind of image you're going to save. The general rule of thumb is that if it is something with complicated color, such as photographs, the main option you want to go with is JPEG. So, things I'm saying as far as complicated color, if you have a real photograph, if I take a photograph of this wall right here, you might say, like, Jonathan, that's not really complicated color. We just have a little bit of red and we have a white wall here. But no, if I take a photograph of this wall, there's all sorts of gradients which are going on here with how the light is actually hitting this wall. There's a lot of complicated color. There's a lot of different colors in just simply taking a picture of this wall, which is the case with almost all photographs. Things that are simple in color are graphics that are usually created digitally. So if you create a logo or any other sort of graphics, even if it's a graphic that has some kind of gradient in it, chances are there's not that many colors actually in it. So a lot of times, where we would use JPEG for something with complicated colors, something with a lot of different color in it, like photographs, we would use either PNG or GIF for things that have simple colors, or like graphics that are created digitally. Questions? Yes.
Is there a reason you decided here?
That's a good question. So when it comes to GIF or PNG8, they're pretty identical. It's up to you. Like, you can take whatever image you have and kind of take a look at the two and compare. Like, you might notice just slight differences in, like, how it represents certain colors. But for the most part, GIF and PNG8 are identical. PNG24 is actually a whole different animal, and we're going to be getting into that in just a minute. But again, the rule of thumb is we use JPEGs for photographs or anything that's complicated in colors, and we use GIFs/PNGs for anything that is simple in color, particularly graphics that are created digitally. Any other questions? Okay. So let's go with a GIF to start off with here. So I have this image. Oh, if I didn't specify, I just did, if you do Command plus or Command minus, you can zoom in on both the optimized as well as the original simultaneously. And you can see as I zoom into this, whereas when I zoom out, this just looks like yellow text. It basically looks like there's yellow, there's black, and there's like a couple of white specks in here. But as I zoom in, we can tell that there's a lot of different colors when we look at this pixel by pixel. A lot of different colors to kind of make up that yellow. So right now I have GIF selected. When it comes to GIF or PNG8, it's going to give us a color table, which is basically 256 colors that we have available to us to make up this image. So it's basically going to take, no matter how complicated the image is or how many colors it actually is, it's going to narrow all those colors down to 256 pixels. That's a great tongue twister. That is closest to the colors that you have in there. Now, usually GIFs and PNGs are going to be relatively small. It's going to give you the file size underneath where it has the file type and on the optimized size. So that is 26 kilobytes, very, very small. Pretty much you can just save it and forget it. But if you wanted to make this smaller in file size, what we could do is where it has colors here in the top right, you could click on that and choose a lower number. And what that's going to do is it's not only going to make the file size itself smaller, but it's also going to simplify the image. So if I want just a kind of a much more pure yellow here, I might go to like that's pretty extreme. Yeah, that's really extreme. But I might go to like 16 colors, and you see that there's a lot less definition in the amount of yellows here, which means that it's using a lot less colors, which means that it would end up being maybe a slightly sharper image. It's kind of up to you as far as like, you know, kind of looking at that and seeing like, you know, what really kind of makes the most sense for that image to kind of cut out some of the extra noise and things like that if you wanted to do it that way. Like I said, most GIFs and PNGs are going to be pretty small file size wise, even at 256 colors. So with GIF or PNG 8, kind of works the same way. You can change the quality based on the number of colors you're actually using. With JPEGs are a lot simpler. JPEGs gives you a quality, which is here in the top right, and allows you to change that quality from 0 to 100. And it's basically exactly what it sounds like. So it's just the amount of quality that you have in the image, how complicated the colors are. If you take the quality down, all the way down to 0, again, you're getting a lot more noise, but it's a much smaller file. So it's up to you, again, as the designer, to decide where you want to balance between the file size as well as the quality. And like I said, for the most part, because we're on a lot of the faster connections, as long as your dimensions are less than, you know, 1600 pixels, 1400 pixels, something like that, you can usually keep with a pretty big images if you use this Save for Web tool. You might say to yourself, like, look, the Save for Web tool is great, but I already know how to save JPEGs. I can just do the color type as the RGB, and I'll just save it as a JPEG, just doing the normal way. If you put this JPEG at 100% quality, it's still going to be much smaller than what you would get if you tried to save it normally. So if I put this at 100% quality, this is telling me that it's at 35K. And that's the maximum quality. If, and this is probably going to prove me wrong, if I just tried to save this doing the normal Photoshop Save for Web kind of thing, and I do not use that tool, chances are the file file itself is going to be a lot bigger. The Save for Web just naturally makes the file size a lot smaller, even at 100% quality. So, last thing on the Save for Web, or just a couple more things. We also have the image size. I actually recommend resizing the image even before you get into the Save for Web, but you also have the option of changing the size of the image within this tool. So you can change the size of the image with the width and the height. And as soon as you're done making all those changes, you can go ahead and click Save, and you can kind of save that image wherever it makes the most sense with your files. So I'd like to get into the PNG 24, why that's a little bit different, as well as transparency. But any questions so far? Okay. So, transparency. Another reason why you might want to choose between the JPEG, GIF, or PNG has to do with transparency. Let's go ahead and take a generous wand around this and So I isolate the text for the most part, and I guess a few of the stars here, out of the image here. So if I do a safer web at this point, let's go ahead and zoom into this pretty significantly. If I go to GIF, what we're seeing here, and this is again a little bit hard to see on the screen, but you're going to be able to see this a little bit better on your own screens, is that it is preserving the transparency as long as I have transparency here checked. So there's a checkbox for transparency, and again I'm under GIF. There's a checkbox here for transparency, and it is preserving the transparency if I have that checked. However, you'll notice that it takes the transparency kind of pixel by pixel. Every single pixel is either completely transparent or completely opaque. And the easiest way to tell this is if we change the matte color. So the matte will basically fill in wherever something is slightly transparent. I'm going to pick other, I'm going to pick red just to illustrate the point. When we have transparency checked and we have the matte at something, basically it's going to take a pixel which is slightly transparent and it's going to fill it in with that matte as a background. Now, again, even if I have the matte to something like white, it's basically going to fill in any pixel that's slightly transparent with that white background. So, whenever you're dealing with GIF or PNG 8, you have the option for transparency, but it's going to make a very kind of hard edge to any of your images there. JPEGs don't have the option for transparency whatsoever, so it'll just fill in with whatever matte you have. Now, the difference is PNG24. PNG24 is the only option that allows slight transparencies when it comes to any of the pixels. So again, for pixel to pixel, the PNG24 will allow for slight transparencies, which if, in this particular case, if I wanted to isolate Star Trek and I wanted to put that somewhere on my page, like say I have a page that is has a green background, and I want to isolate Star Trek and I put that image on my green background. If I'm using GIF or PNG 8 that has that matte, then I'm going to see a slight halo around it. It might be a white halo, it might be a black halo, but it's going to be a slight halo because it's going to have those that hard edge there. If I want it to be smooth on top of whatever background I have, then I want to use PNG24, because the PNG24 is the only one that, again, allows slight transparency. Now you might say to yourself, why would I ever use GIF or PNG 8 if PNG24 is so much more powerful? Why would I just ever use those options? PNG24s tend to be a little bit bigger in file size, not significantly, but a little bit bigger. So again, trying to be as economical as possible with your file sizes. You want to use regular GIF or PNG 8 if you're not dealing with slight transparencies, but that's what PNG24 actually is for. Any questions on this? Okay. So, a few minutes left. Let's look at actually how to put our images in our HTML. So right now I have these two images, and I'm going to create a folder called images. I'm going to put those two images, we just have them as JPEGs, photo01.jpg and photo02.jpg. I'm going to put that inside the images folder. Now, I'm going to go back to my index.html. And here we're going to create the image tag. So the image tag, like all tags, starts with a left angle bracket and it starts with the tag name itself, which in this case is just IMG. It's not image spelled all the way out, even though we call it the image tag, but it's just IMG. Now, the image tag is one of those very, very rare tags that does not have an ending tag. So the way that we end an image tag, even for the beginning of it, is we end it with a slash and right angle bracket. So, unlike a lot of tags that would be like something like this, we don't do the image tag in this way. We have IMG, and it's just simply that one tag. It does not have an end tag, so it's just the beginning tag, and it actually ends with a slash right angle bracket rather than just a right angle bracket by itself. So, the image tag, obviously the browser doesn't know what to do with this, doesn't know what image you're talking about. So we have to add in a attribute, just like we do with the A tag. The attribute with the image tag is src, which is short for source. So we have src as our attribute name, as opposed to href, which is our other attribute name. But just like any attribute, we have the attribute name, we have equals, and then we have quotes, and then we put the value inside the quotes. Now, the value for src works exactly the same way as the value for the href. We set up the path to the image we want to link to, and we also specify as far as the file name itself. So again, right now I'm in the index.html. Whenever you're trying to decide path, you always want to look at your folder and think about the current HTML file that you're actually editing at that moment. So from here, from this index.html that I'm editing, I need to go inside the images folder, and then I need to find photo01.jpg. So inside those quotations, I'm going to put in images slash and then photo01.jpg. Again, we want the file name as well as the extension. So, let's go ahead and take a look at that. I'm going to go ahead and refresh my index.html, and we can see that the image is right there in the on the page. Any questions on the image tag? Now, for the homework, I mentioned as far as having a link that's wrapping around the image tags themselves. So basically what I'm talking about in the homework is you're going to have an images folder. Inside the images folder, you're going to have two folders. One that's called thumb and one that's called large.
That's inside the folder.
Yes. So you're going to have a, for your homework, you're going to have some sort of HTML, which is, again, you can call like week 2 or homework 2, whatever you'd like. But you're going to have an HTML file for your homework, and inside the same folder as that HTML file, you're going to have an images folder. Inside the images folder, you're going to have two more folders. One that's called large and one that's called thumb. Now, right now, I'm going to put the same exact images in each one, but what I'd like you to do for your homework is I'd like you to take, again, 5 images that you're just going to find online that relate to your subject matter, and you're going to take those images into Photoshop, do the Save for Web to actually format those images. Inside the thumb folder, the images should be 200 pixels wide. So you're going to save them as 200 pixel wide images, and those are going to go inside the thumb folder.
The large, what did you say about the large?
So the large, I'm not gonna say specifically what it has to be, but I want it to be under what did I say on the website? 1200 pixels? Yeah. So I want it to be under 1200 pixels. Just in case you find something that's very huge, I don't want you to save it at that size. But if it is just like 500 pixels or 600 pixels, something like that, that's fine. Just as long as it's not too huge.
So basically we are going to have the same pictures duplicated in both folders, is that what you say?
Yes, so they are going to be the same pictures, but they're going to be different sizes in each folder.
Okay.
Does
Now-
anyone, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Does anyone have any other questions about the folder structure for the images? Or what goes in each
For
one?
the images, no. But in general, for the general folder, you want the index, and the images, and the pages. You want order.
Yeah, and the thing is, you can call this something different. Like you can call it homework 2 or something like that. But inside the same folder as that HTML file, there should be an images folder.
Yes. Can you go inside the pages folder? Can I see what you have?
Oh, you don't have to have, for your homework, you don't have to have a pages folder.
So it's just gonna be the one.
Yep,
page.
one HTML file.
We are not gonna be linking anything in this assignment.
Well, you are, but for this assignment, you're going to have the one HTML file and you're going to have a bunch of images. So you're going to have the one HTML file, you're going to have an images folder,
That's it.
and yes, and inside those images folders, you just have the duplicate of those
Okay.
images. So, where the linking comes in is this. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to represent the thumbnails. Just like this, we have an image tag which represents that thumbnail. And it shows up here. What you're going to do is you're going to wrap an anchor tag around that image tag. So, so we're going to have, let's say, okay. So now this image is now inside of images, but it's also inside of thumb. So now that's actually the proper space for this this image tag. Now around this image, we're going to put in our anchor tag. Now this can go on the line above or the line below. It doesn't really matter. It can also even go on the same line if you really want to. It's just that when it's on the same line, sometimes it wraps the text, and it can be a little bit confusing. So if it's easier to read, I would put it on the line above as far as the beginning anchor tag. And then on the line below, you can have the ending anchor tag. Now this tabbing doesn't really matter to the browser, but feel free to put in these extra tabs to make it easier for you to read. So it's very easy to see that this image tag is inside of this anchor tag. So does everyone understand what I mean by wrapping the image tag with the anchor tag?
It was writing, so can you just walk through it one more time for me?
Sure. So I would start off by actually just creating the image tag itself and making sure that when you refresh the page, the image tag shows up. Then you're going to actually wrap this image tag with an anchor tag. So on the line before, you're going to create that beginning anchor tag, and on the line after, you're going to create the ending anchor tag. Again, the tabbing is up to you, but it does make the code a lot cleaner in order to actually see what's going on. So within that beginning anchor tag, we're going to set up an href. And the href is going to go, instead of going to an HTML file, it's going to go to the large image. So we have the href, and I'm going to set it to go inside the images folder, inside the large folder, and it's going to find whatever I call the large image. So you're going to do this 5 times. Like I said, for the homework, you're going to have 5 different images. Like I said, I would recommend starting off with just simply creating the image tag itself. Refresh your page to make sure the image is showing up. If it's not showing up, double check the path. Make sure that the path, the folder that's inside the folder, that those folder names are exactly correct, as well as the file name, and make sure that it's actually representing what's in your files. Then you're going to wrap that image tag with an anchor tag. The anchor tag, the href for that, instead of going to an HTML file, it's going to go to the large version of that image. So, what should happen is you're going to have 5 different images in your HTML, and they should be about 200 pixels wide. And when I click on that image, it's going to just open up that image all by itself. It's going to open up the larger version of that image, just all by itself. But again, there should be 5 of those.
So we're just sending you one link.
Yes. So you're going to upload. Yeah, you're going to. Yeah, you're going to end up uploading the HTML as well as the images into your Media Temple account. But when it comes to actually sending me the link, you're just sending me the link to the HTML file itself. Now again, if you have any trouble, or if you want to ask me questions, like you're saying there's something that's not making sense, and you're trying to ask me questions, what you're going to want to do is package like your HTML as well as your images together and create a zip off of that, and then send me that zip. If you have questions along the way, or like I said, if you have any issues with your host and you have to send me the homework assignment anyway, you can package your stuff together, put it into a zip, and send me that. Does that make sense? Okay. So unfortunately, so in the homework. In the homework, I also mentioned as far as using the heading tags and the paragraph tags. Since we didn't actually go over that today, I'm not going to necessarily require that you do that. However, if you want to actually look those up, those will be on the W3 Schools website.
I did have paragraph on my first assignment.
Yeah, I noticed that some of you guys did paragraphs, and that's great. We didn't actually go over it last week, but I might try to just very, very briefly go over it next week, just to make sure everybody's on board. There's links on the class website to what are called heading tags, which are like, these kinds of heading tags here, using H1, H2, H3, H6, and it's mostly just like gives that text a specific size and sometimes bolds it. As well as paragraph tags. So yeah, look those up on the class website. I'm not necessarily going to require it if you can't get those things to work. But the image tag and the anchor tag thing is something I definitely do want. So again, you're going to gather up some content that's related to your subject matter, and you're going to use that as the content for your HTML page. But yeah, any other questions? So, like I said, the Tuesday section with David, he's going to be able to answer technical questions, especially regarding the hosting. Hosting is something. Well, I've used many different hosts in my my life. The hosting for the school is something relatively new to me. So anything regarding the hosting, those questions probably would go better with David. But any questions you have whatsoever, just CC both of us. It's the best way to come to that question to answer.
So, but this kind of question is better to ask you.
Sure, but with any sort of emails, I would just suggest CCing both of us, and both of us will be able to answer those kinds of questions. But generally, I'm saying, like, David is going to be better as far as answering the simple questions, and I'm more than willing to answer any sort of technical questions, especially regarding the requirements of the homework. And lastly, again, I have from, I think, most of you, but if you have not given me your subject try to get that to me as soon as possible this week. So again, I can make sure that you are not sharing it with somebody else. But cool. Thank you, everybody.
You know what David's going over in class on Tuesday?